Welcome back for Keeper of the Lost Cities Nightfall, chapters 66 and 67. These are going to be good ones. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a chapter, and this is 66. Apprentice was healed. Sophie hadn't meant to do it, hadn't recognized that she was unconsciously going through the steps of a healing, but Apprentice seemed okay. He was disoriented and overwhelmed and heartbroken, but he hadn't shattered. He'd simply clung to his son, and they'd both cried together, until his weak body collapsed into sleep. Real sleep, Livy assured them. She'd quadruple-checked. She'd asked Keith to read Prentice's emotions to make sure they were holding steady, and had Tam take a quick reading of his shadow vapor to ensure it was within normal range. Mr. Forkle also chose to monitor Prentice's dreams. He could do that now without risking his sanity, because Prentice was healed. But he wasn't back to normal either. His memories were a mess, the splintered fragments mashed together so haphazardly that there was no rhyme or reason to anything. And no matter how hard any of them tried to help him make sense of it, his mind remained in chaos. "It's up to Prentice now," Mr. Forkle said as he took a seat next to Sophie on one of the benches lining the cabin's wrap-around porch. "He's the only one who can sort out his past." Blur and Wraith had already left, as had Della, and the rest of the group had ducked outside to give Wiley, Prentice, and Tiergan some privacy to discuss what happened to Syra. "But he will get back to normal?" Sophie asked. "Normal's a relative term," Ald reminded her, his eyes on the forest beyond, where a smoky mist seemed to be thickening as the day stretched on. He didn't look as peaceful as Sophie would have expected, mostly thoughtful. Fitz went over and wrapped him in a hug. "From this point on, Prentice will have his health," Mr. Forkle told them, "and his son, and the chance to make new memories. The rest only time will tell. The consciousness continues to shatter after the initial break, so, after all of these years, his memories have all but dissolved. Imagine a piece of glass that you smashed with a stone. One hit, and it's easy enough to see how to fit the shards back together. But smash it again, and again, and again, and again. It shouldn't have been a surprise, but the reality of it flattened Sophie's heart. There's really nothing we can do." "If you're hoping for a quick fix, no," Mr. Forkle admitted. "But I do think it would be wise for all of us to make memory logs of everything we remember about Prentice, or things we've glimpsed in his mind, or—" "I disagree," Quillen interrupted. "He's already lost more than a decade of his life. Why waste another second of trying to scrape together the past? He should be focusing on rebuilding and moving forward." "Why can't he do both?" Lynn countered. "Because nothing good can come from looking too deeply into the tragedies that can't be changed." Quinlan paced to the farthest corner of the porch, tracing his hand along the railing. "We all watched Grady and Adeline fall apart after what happened to Jolie. Are we really wishing the same for Prentice? I think it's too early to know how he'll respond long-term to Syra's loss," Alden said quietly, "but I can't imagine he'll want to forget her." "I never said forget her," Quinlan argued, "but he already remembers enough. Any more will only add to his pain, which is why we should treat his memory loss as the gift that it is." No one seemed to know what to say to that, not even Sophie, and it killed her that Quinlan might be right, that it might be better to leave Prentice with fragments and mysteries than put him through additional grief. She couldn't figure out why it hurt so much, or wouldn't let herself admit it, until she was away from Keith's prying empath senses, alone in her bed that night, with nothing but Iggy's snoring and her own miserable thoughts for company. Some tiny, desperate part of her had been clinging to the hope that whatever secrets had caused Prentice to call Swan Song, whatever had helped him to know about the lodestar symbol, would somehow lead them to Nightfall. It was a silly, illogical plan, But now that it was gone, the only choice left was to go back to their needle in a haystack ways, back to the endless piles of schoolwork and discouraging nightly reports, and nothing. No answers, no plans, each day dragging her further from her human parents and leading the Neverseen to their surely inevitable victory. "I saw this human movie one time," Dex said to her on the 4th day back at Foxfire after the healing, making her drop the book she'd been pulling from her locker. She hadn't noticed him beside her, had barely noticed anything for days. "It was about this plague that turned everything into zombies," Dex continued, retrieving her book and handing it over. "There were all these people shuffling around with glassy eyes and rotting flesh. It was super gross, but also kind of hilarious to see what humans are afraid of." "Okay," Sophie said as she closed her locker. "You're telling this to me why?" "Because that's what you're starting to remind me of, without the bloody sores. I mean, Fitz gave you another box of pudding puffs at lunch, and you didn't even blush. And you've been walking around with this stuck to your shoulder all day." He pulled off a bold-lettered sign that said, "All hail Team Fosterkeef." She blinked. He lowered his voice, making sure no one nearby was listening, before he asked, "You're worried about your parents, right?" A lump caught in her throat. "I shouldn't be." "Why not?" "Because there are so many huger problems, like Sporadine and—" "Hey," he said, waiting until she looked at him. "You're allowed to care about your family." Tears welled in her eyes. "We've lost almost another week, and I know the Washers can erase their memories, but that doesn't help them right now with whatever misery they're suffering. I know. But I bet they don't even know how long it's been, or where they are, or what's happening. You and I didn't remember. They kept us drugged. Not the whole time." "Don't," Dex interrupted. "If you're going to find them and fix all these other problems, you need to stay focused, and there's a really good chance I'm right about them being sedated. You have to admit it. So can't you try to believe it and use it to shut the nightmares down before they get too distracting? Just tell yourself, they're sleeping, they're sleeping, they're sleeping." Her logical side wanted to poke a million holes in his theory. But he had a point. She had no idea what her parents were dealing with, so why not hope for the best instead of assuming the worst? "I'll try," she promised. "Try it now," he pushed. "Close your eyes and think it until you mean it." It took so many repetitions that Sophie lost count. But by the end, her nerves had settled, and her nausea had faded, and everything felt a bit clearer. "Keep that up, every time the panic comes back, okay?" Dex pleaded. "And if you need to talk, hail me, anytime." She nodded, and he reached for her hand, giving her gloved fingers a gentle squeeze before realizing he was going to be late for his technopathy session, and racing away. It wasn't until Sophie was halfway to her own session that she realized that was the first time Dex had talked to her. Really talked to her since their infamous kiss. It was a small victory compared to the massive battles they were waging, but she was still grateful for it. And later that night, she actually slept. Chapter 67. Dex's suggestion kept Sophie out of zombie mode for another week, though it required lots of mentally chanting, "They're asleep, they're asleep, they're asleep." But it also dredged up a whole other kind of worry. If the Neverseen were keeping her parents sedated, could they be using Sporadine? And as much as she tried to tell herself that being in a deep, coma-like trance was better than being conscious prisoners, she couldn't help wondering what kind of toll a drug like that would take, especially since Lady Cadence and the ogres still seemed no closer to a cure. So when Friday rolled around again and there still hadn't been the slightest bit of news or progress, Sophie found herself ignoring Sandor and climbing to the top level of Foxfire's glass pyramid instead of heading to her afternoon session. And when the door to Magnate Leader's office was locked, she plopped down on the floor to wait for him. "Whoa, is the mysterious Miss F ditching?" Keith asked several minutes later as he strode up the stairs, followed by Ro and Magnate Leto. Or did you get sent here? Either way, you clearly deserve the highest of high fives. Why are you here? Sophie asked, ignoring his raised hand as she stumbled to her feet. Tiny incident in the level 5 wing, but don't look at me. This one was all on her. He hooked a thumb toward Ro. Why does that not surprise me? Sandor grumbled. Ro batted her eyelashes. Hey, it's not my fault if someone gets their foot broken while trying to trip me. It is if you stomp on them as hard as you can, Magnate Leto argued. His usual sleek hair looked much more disheveled than usual as he led the way to his triangular office. You should have heard the crunch, Keith whispered when Sophie followed him in. And the squealing, Ro added. You elves are such melodramatic babies. The bone barely even poked out of her skin. Sophie shuddered. Who was it? I don't think you know, Shada, Keith said, collapsing into one of the tweed armchairs across from Magnate Leto's gilded antique-style desk. I barely know her either, except that she always gives me lots of presents at midterms and finals, he winked. By the way, love what you've done with the place, Leto. I'm sure you do. Magnate Leto sank into his own chair, which was more of an upholstered throne now. You're welcome for making it so that you don't have to stare at 10,000 reflections of yourself every day, Keith told him. Sophie elbowed Keith as she sat next to him. You don't get to brag about leaving me covered in shattered glass. Wait, did you wreck this place? Ro asked, studying the sloping glass walls and pointed ceiling with new appreciation. He did, and Sandor's glare made it very clear that Keith hadn't been forgiven. He's lucky the floor didn't shatter with the walls. I knew it was thicker, Keith mumbled, just like I knew the cloak would keep Sophie covered. Ro whistled. You know, when you're trying to impress a girl, it's probably better if you don't almost kill her. Ah, this is Foster. She loves the thrill. Moving back to the much more pressing matter, Magnate Leto interceded. Shayla Adele happens to be the daughter of 2 important emissaries. So, I'm a princess? Ro pointed to the tattoos on her forehead. I'm aware, but royalty or not, you still have to face consequences for your actions, and not just the detention. I'm going to make you both serve through the end of the school year. The Adeles will insist the council issue their own punishment. What about the punishment for her assault on me? Ro countered. She was trying to knock me into that ugly jeweled dragon statue in the atrium. And if you think I'm going to let some scrawny elf make a fool out of me, Miss Adele's punishment will be made. With days of bed rest she now requires while her bones heal, Magnate Leto interrupted. And yours will most likely involve some sort of apology during orientation next week, which I recommend you both attempt to sound sincere for. I understand that some of my prodigies have been far from welcoming, and I'm working to correct that. But in the meantime, play nice, and if anything like this happens again, try to defend yourself in a way that Elwyn can quickly heal with an elixir. Ro crossed her arms. Fine, but I'm going to need a list of what exactly that leaves available, ranked in order of how painful they are. Can I get a copy of that list too? Keith asked. Magnate Leto rubbed his temples. Some days I miss being a beacon. Hey, if you ever need a day off of principal duty, I'd be happy to fill in, Keith offered. Me too, Ro said. And what about you? Magnate Leto said, ignoring them and shifting his attention to Sophie. To what do I owe this visit? Sophie glanced at Ro. I need to talk to you alone. Wow. Subtlety is not your thing, Ro told her. So let's end this misery. I already know this guy is the Forkle-nator. Took me about 2 seconds to figure it out after I met him. The berries might mask his scent for your noses. Or his. She grinned at Sandor. But one whiff and I was like, come on, who are we kidding? Interesting, Magnate Leto said, leaning back in his chair. Have you shared this knowledge with your father? Nope. He'll respect you more if you tell him yourself. And I never thought I'd say this, but I want you guys to keep working together, even after he tracks down the jerks who defected. Your council are too stuffy, and the never-seen are backstabbers, but the Black Swan might actually be useful. Magnate Leto's lips twitched into a smile. I appreciate your discretion. He turned back to Sophie. I'm assuming you're here about the journals? Sophie nodded. Please tell me you've finally learned something that might help. As a matter of fact, I have. I'd been planning on calling a meeting once we finished the school week and I could take a break from this identity, but since you're here... He reached into his desk and held up a rough sketch of the Nightfall symbol, tracing a finger along the lines. What does this look like to you? I'm guessing the correct answer isn't, a line, Sophie said. Keith leaned closer, squinting at it. I think it's a rune. It is, as is this, Magnate Leader said, tracing his finger over another line in the same design. And this, and this, and this, and this. 7 runes in all, which means this isn't just a symbol, it's a signature. Now he'd had Sophie's attention. You know the name of the escaped prisoner? I do. He ran his fingers over each of the runes again. Vespera. That concludes chapters 66 and 67. I'll see you tomorrow for 68 and 69. Bye.